This is FE Peer Review. The date is March the 5th, 2023. Terry Riker of Flat Out Truth gets it flat out wrong. This all gets rather complicated rather quickly, so I'll try to keep this short, concise, and to the point. It all began for me with Simon Dan, who put a Flat Earth Friday video out about a certain flat earther named Flat Out Truth. So apparently this Flat Out Truth has been making videos trying to debunk various people like Simon Dan, MC Toon, and Professor Dave. There was reference in Simon Dan's video to Professor Dave and MC Toon, and then all of this stuff going back and forth. They've done responses to him, he's done responses to them. It all gets rather confusing, but in the long run, entertaining. So I went over and looked at Flat Earth Truth's channel, and I found the video in question, Debunking Professor Dumb Dave episode 9. This was Flat Out Truth's video here. And what caught my attention was this little clip that Dan had on his video, and I found it, and here it is. It's a gentleman named George Van de Cure. We'll watch a bit of that. I decided I needed to find out more about who this George Van de Cure was. Anyhow, I'll just wrap this up. Flat Earth Truth's channel, he says, come to my new channel. All the comments are turned off here. So he's got a new channel he's created, and I left him a comment just so he'd know what I'm doing on his latest video. This is Flat Out Truth's new channel. I just saw your video about Professor Dave, number 9. There's a clip in it from a scientist named George Van de Cure. I found out some interesting stuff about that clip, and I'll be making a short video on it. I just wanted to let you know. I'll be mentioning your video as what brought it to my attention. That video is closed for comments. That's why I'm writing here. So we'll take a look now at that clip. And then we're going to look into who this George Van de Cure is.
The sundial to work. The ancient Egyptians, Babylonians, the Incas, the Mayans. This is how they told time. This is how they kept track of time and days and months and years. For thousands and thousands of years, because they knew that they lived on a flat earth with a sun making its circuit around the disk of the flat earth. That's how this sundial works. And this is imperial science that was here thousands of years before they ever came along and said that the earth was a sphere, a globe. And that right there alone debunks your second part of challenge number 10, but I'm going to throw a little bonus in from a real scientist.
There's all kinds of proofs right around you that show that the earth is flat. A very simple one to think of is that we use plumb bobs to build buildings. In other words, to get the wall of a building going straight down, you'll take a string with a heavy weight hanging from it, and you make the building follow that string. That plumb bob will point to the center of a round earth. That means that if you imagine that this was the correct earth, you can imagine a plumb bob held here would point in that direction, and a plumb bob held here would point in that direction. That means the buildings would be bigger on the top than at the bottom.
So anyways, Professor Dave, there's your imperial science. And I do have to say, this was your most weakest and easiest challenge to debunk. So, for the last and final time, everybody say it with me. We have debunked Professor Dave's challenge number 10. And therefore, that brings us to the end of the episode and to the end of this series of debunking Professor Dave's 10 challenges.
Okay, very interesting stuff. We've got somebody characterized as a scientist who's giving this argument that he says supports the flat earth based on these plumb bobs and the reality that buildings don't generally get wider as they get taller. So I saw this and thought, who's this guy and where does this bit of video come from? It took a bit of searching, but I managed to track it all down. And this is what I found. It comes from a movie, a video made in 1990 called In Search of the Edge. And George Van de Cure, well, let's take a look here. I haven't actually gotten my hands on a copy of the movie, but I did find a document made by the filmmakers as a educational tool to accompany the film. This is the document here, and I'm going to have a link in the description and in a pinned comment. It's called In Search of the Edge, an inquiry into the shape of the earth and the disappearance of Andrea Barnes. And it tells us what these people had in mind. So here we are, study guide, a companion to the film. The film was made by a gentleman named Scott Barry, various people involved, among them contributors Chris Warsnop and George Vandecure. So there's the name we're looking for. And I'm going to read you quickly the opening introduction here that gives the background and the purpose of the film. In Search of the Edge is a comprehensive documentary, 26 minutes in length, proving fairly conclusively that the global Earth doctrine is little more than an elaborate hoax. At once both absurdist and matter-of-fact, it presents a carefully constructed argument from a well-researched point of view: the Earth is flat. The film is designed as an educational tool to help kids learn to think for themselves. Now, listen close here as I read this. It's not obvious what's going on. At least to some people it might not be obvious. As our senses are dulled by a daily barrage of media information, the tendency is to accept everything at face value. And as a reminder, this was made in 1990, before the internet was everywhere. Since the news tells us something is so, it must be so, even though we all know intellectually that the news, and that extends to documentary programming, is someone's interpretation of the facts. But nevertheless, there it is on television, so we believe it, regardless of how the facts have been interpreted. By presenting a vigorous case to the viewer, supporting a theory that every school child knows to be false, in a, quote, scientific and entertaining way, In Search of the Edge challenges the viewer to stand up and say, wait a minute, that's baloney. I think I need to read that sentence again. By presenting a vigorous case to the viewer, supporting a theory that every school child knows to be false, not believes, not accepts, but knows to be false, in a, quote, scientific, in quotes, entertaining way, In Search of the Edge challenges the viewer to stand up and say, wait a minute, that's baloney. So what's baloney here? The theory that every school child knows to be false. The story behind the film. The intention from the beginning was to make a film that attempted to prove, in convincing fashion, something that everyone knew was false. Proving that the Earth was flat seemed to be a challenging subject. The first step was to research flat Earth societies and the development of various theories regarding the shape of the Earth. Once the research was complete, the interview subjects were chosen, a crew was booked, and filming began. The men answered the questions in their own words using their own ideas, and if the film is a success, it's largely due to the charm and inventiveness of these three men. George Tinkus, retired teacher, Dr. Leo Ferrari, a university professor and one-time head of the Canadian Flat Earth Society, and George Vandecure, a scientist and currently headmaster of a private secondary school. They are all, by the way, globularists in real life. Got that? These people do not believe the Earth is flat. They're playing roles in this movie, this educational film, which is a mock documentary pretending to present flat Earth arguments. In real life, they are, quote, globularists. To tie the interviews together, a story was written about a fictional woman who devoted her life to convincing the world that the Earth was indeed flat. Terry, if you're watching this, fictional means she did not exist. She was a fiction, an invention. Andrea Barnes was born. Stock footage and still photographs that supported her story were found, and animation was drawn to illustrate some of the arguments. To make the film as convincing as possible, an on-camera host was used rather than just a voiceover narrator. But just so it wouldn't be too convincing, there were clues dropped in throughout the film. Some examples of these clues are the cows in the middle of the blizzard in Andrea's second Antarctica trip, and the story of Andrea's brother going into the transportation business. The host's on-camera segments, including reaction shots to be cut into the original interviews, were filmed at a totally different time and place after the rest of the film had been edited together. Much of the music is a little on the pretentious side. To underscore the serious nature of the film, and the sound effects are a combination of real sounds for credibility and cartoon-type effects to give the viewer a few more clues, and that's it. Hopefully the film accomplishes what it's set out to do. So you got that, Terry? Andrea Barnes was fictional, doesn't exist. These three guys were playing roles for this bit of educational cinema here. There's the fictional Andrea Barnes. Then there's a bunch of, in this document, there's a little bit of background as a reminder to the students after they've watched the movies. And then there's activities they can engage in, a whole series of questions that they can answer based on the film. And where it starts to get interesting, and this is the part Terry might want to take a good look at, we get the responses to all the questions for the teacher. This would be the teacher's part of the document here. And guess what? It includes answers as to why the nonsensical flat earth arguments are false. So there you go, Terry. The whole thing was a piece of fiction. The guy in that video is playing a role. He is not a flat earther. He is a principal headmaster of a school trying to make a little document here that helps students figure out when they are being presented with nonsense and how to recognize the nonsense when they see it. And you know what, Terry? You believed it. You believed the nonsense that these school children can see through. Good for you, Terry. You did a great job. As always, you'll find relevant links in the description and in a pinned comment. And if you enjoyed this, I would appreciate a thumbs up and a subscribe. I've been not very active the last few months because I've got other things going on in my life, but I do have a little bit of time in the next few weeks, so I hope to get back to a few of my recent projects, and I hope to see you all there. The next one I'll be working on is probably going to be wrapping up the Buckminster Fuller globe maps, followed by the Mercator maps, and then I think I'm going to get back to Leeds Skalness. So there you go. Have a great day. Talk to you all soon. Remember, leave a comment. Okay, bye-bye.